Hello and welcome back to Watercolor School. I'm Vicky and I'm glad you're here. We are currently on the final week, which is week 6 of the 6-week program. This week we will be looking at different brush types and doing some mark making exercises. We'll be completing our 16-page handmade art journal and you will be graduating from the program. Let's start with some mark making using our brushes. Now this is the flat brush, and what I'm doing is laying the brush down on its bristles. Rather than using the brush in a conventional way, this mark making exercise will show you just how versatile each of these brushes is. These are all from the Kmart selection of brushes. And I'm really impressed with the quality for the price. I think they're great value. I don't see any need to upgrade your brushes at this point, as I think they're working really well. I'm putting just a little bit more pressure on the left-hand side of the brush and getting different marks from the first lot of marks. Now I'm doing some dry brushing with the flat brush. And because this is on the textured side of the Kmart paper, it gives me a lovely effect. Now I'm bringing in the filbert brush. This has a rounded tip. And each time I'm doing a different mark, I'm choosing a different colour from my palette. And this is the warm-up exercise for decorating our cover. The filbert brush gives these different marks, which are ideal for creating a little flower. I'm still keeping the bristles at the side, but I'm changing the direction of each of the marks. So I've created a flower quite simply just by doing this technique of laying the brush on its bristles. Now when you squish the brush into the paper, you can create some really interesting circle shapes. And I'm using the long round brush for this. And I'm going to do the same with the smaller brush, with my filbert brush, and make a smaller circle. You can see how simple these techniques are. This is the really long brush. So this would suggest that it's good for making straight lines or curved lines. Now I'm using the small round brush, each time choosing a different colour. Just some wiggly lines. And you can fill in any parts that you want to add a little bit more pigment into while the paint is still wet. And I've put my fingers right down to the end of the ferrule, right near the bristles, and just touching it to the paper and creating very fine lines. And with the flat brush, you can do a similar technique just by tapping, or you can create a long line as well. Now I'm picking up the pink colour again like I did with the dry brushing, and this time I'm adding lots of water to create a nice blend. So let's start on our front cover. I'm going to use that first technique of laying the flat brush down on its bristles, and I'm following the masking tape line on the left-hand side of my cover and getting a nice straight line to begin with. And the technique is exactly what we've been practicing. Each time I use a different brush, I'll change the colour. So this is that lovely pink stripe at the bottom of our practice sheet, and I'm just going over with a little water and creating a lovely smooth blend. Now for these little petal shapes with a filbert brush, and just so that it's easier for you to follow along, I'm using the same colours I used on the practice sheet on the front cover. You can see by turning your brush to 90 degrees, you can lay it down and get a different effect yet again. Now I'm taking those brown squiggly lines and making them straight with the long round brush. And now I'm making some circles. I'm going to vary the size of the circles just for interest. I'm going to have some larger and some smaller. And this exercise is really helpful in understanding how to balance out your designs and how to create a pleasing composition. These are the Micador paints that we've been using throughout the whole program. These paints are highly pigmented, however they are not light fast. And if you're considering upgrading, I'll show you some options of how you can upgrade into more professional paints that are light fast and archival. Now I'm going to use the large flat brush and create some rectangle shapes by simply laying the brush on its bristles, as we've been doing with all the others. And I'm going to offset this line so that I have one shape on the left, one on the right, one on the left, one on the right, just for a bit of added interest. I would love to see the work you've been doing at home. You can find me on Instagram at Vicky Parfano Studio. I'd love to see what you're doing and comment on your work. You can also leave questions in the comments under any of these videos for the last 6 weeks, and I will answer your questions there as well. Just adding a few little dots into the brown just to play with the idea of the dots that are next door. And one at the top, and that's the front cover finished. Now I'm revisiting the page we did in week 1 of the tree and the flower, and we're going to fill this in with some more flowers. Here I'm creating a rose using some C shapes and some reverse C shapes. Make sure to leave some white space, and in no time you will have painted a really pretty rose. Give it a stem with some green colour. Add some leaves, and there's a simple rose completed. And I'm going to fill up both of these pages with flowers, leaves, and trees. Now I'm using a technique called line and wash, where I'm using a Sharpie. This is the ultra fine point Sharpie. And I'm going to draw the flowers first and then fill them in with watercolour paint. Just wiggly lines. These are abstract flowers. Add some very simple leaves. Let that dry. It doesn't take very long for this to dry. And then you can come back and fill them in with whatever colours you like. I'm going to make them blue. I'm using my small round brush. And colouring in the outside petals. And you need to take your time with this, just be a little bit careful so that you get nice accurate marks and stay within the boundaries of the lines if you can. And all these flowers need now is some yellow centres. I'm doing this while the paint is wet because I know I can very carefully do this, but if you prefer to wait for each colour to dry before adding the next colour, that will work as well. Now I'm making a flower wet in wet. I've got a little bit of blue still on my brush there, but this is mainly water going on the page. And now I'm going to drop in some colour. Just tapping in some colours I'll go with reds and blues because I know they will mix for a purple colour, so I know those colours play well together. You can see how it spreads out to fit the shape of the water. You want that to be completely dry, and now you can start adding your lines. One caution with these markers is they will not work if you use them on wet paint. You have to have dry paint for this to work. I'm making the lines quite wiggly. And now I'm going to just put some lines radiating out from the centre to suggest a little bit of shadow or shading, and add some shorter lines right into the middle so the flower appears to be darker in the centre. And now I'm adding some second lines around the outside. This is a technique that can look quite nice too, where you sketch the lines and then you add a bit of a second line going around the outside, and just a little solid circle in the middle for the centre. You can do the same with your rose if you prefer to have more detail. I'm actually adding in some petal shapes with my marker. Now the rose stands alone without this technique, but this is something you can add if you like this technique and you want to define your flowers even more. Now I'm going to add some little doodles. So these doodles make great filler flowers. So if you need to use some sort of a filler in your work, you can do things like these dandelion flowers that are coming out, or dandelion seed pods, seed heads, seed pods. They're really simple. Just make your lines curved and you can't go wrong with these. A few little dots on the end. They're a really nice little flower to add. So watercolour doodles are another technique where you can make a watercolour design and then doodle over the top of it, similar to what we did with that large flower in the bottom right hand corner. Now I'm going to add some vines. And the secret to vines is curves and Y shapes. These are upside down Y shapes. And I'm going to add just extra little Y's on the end and put a dot on them. It's a very simple doodle, but effective. And you could leave it here, but I'm going to add more shapes just to fill it in a little bit more. So if you have some space in your designs that are quite blank, you can add these doodles over the top and they'll fill in the shape and the design and improve the composition for you. Now let's try some trees. So the trees are very similar to the vine that we've just done, only these are facing upwards. Just some Y shapes. And I'm going to strengthen the trunk just a tiny bit, give it a bit more weight. Now with trees, leaves are shapes against the light. So you don't want to put a blob of colour there. You want to actually be able to see the sky coming through the leaves. So I'm just tapping little dots of colour. And I'm using 2 different shades of green, which really helps to give the effect of light and dark. And when I have a nice canopy shape, and keep adding dots and leaving those white spaces in the branches, you can see how effective that is for making a simple tree. Now you can make abstract trees just by laying down some solid colour, and I'm going to choose a different green each time and a slightly different shape, and we're going to do some abstract trees. This one I'll make sort of like a bullet shape. And then another one which will be a more round shape. Now again, let this dry because we're going to use our fine tip marker to create the trunk and branches. The first one's quite simple. We're just adding some Y shapes, very similar to the first tree that we did. The second tree is going to be quite abstract. I'm just doing a straight line And now adding some horizontal lines all the way up the trunk. And now for this one, I'm just making a very tall, skinny triangle shape and adding some lines across to form a trunk. And then with the last tree, I'm going to do very similar to the first tree. Again, just adding some Y shapes and giving some weight to that line for the trunk. And there you have 4 different abstract trees. Now I'm going to use a sheet of my Kmart paper as a practice sheet, and I'm going to be making some leaves. You can either have small skinny leaves or you can add onto them and make them fatter. It's up to you which shape you use really. This technique is where we are going to use a wooden kitchen skewer and drag it through the wet paint to create the veins of the leaves. Now this is very subtle on this paper. Depending on the paper you have, this can be quite a dramatic effect. And I'm going to do the same again, and this time I'm going to, instead of scratching the lines through, I'm going to add my graphite pencil while the paint is wet. And this works with any kind of pencil. It's particularly good with watercolor pencils. If you have any of those, you can put a green watercolor pencil through the middle of it and it can look really stunning. But it also looks very good with just a plain graphite pencil. And just drawing the midrib and then some lines off to the side. I would love to see the work that you're doing in your 6-week course. So you can find me on Instagram at Vicky Parfano Studio and post some work up there, and I'll come and give you some critique on it. I'd love to see what you're doing. You can also leave comments under any of these videos for the last 6 weeks if you have any questions, or if you're not sure of anything, or if you're just enjoying the course, and I'll answer those comments. I really love receiving comments on my videos. So I'm doing this scratching into wet technique with the skewer. And then I'm doing sort of like a dry brush technique. Here the paint is quite dry, and this is the textured side of the paper. So it's going to give a really nice texture to the leaf. This paper has almost like a little, I guess, crisscross texture on it. See how pretty that is. And now I'm going to do another leaf using more water on my brush, and this will be the graphite pencil technique. If you don't have watercolor pencils, you can use any kind of a pencil as well. Just regular coloring pencils into the wet paint should work. Here I'm adding a little bit of edge to each section of the leaf so that it's not just a flat leaf. Draw the midrib and then add a few lines. And you can see how nice that looks. So here's our cover. Here's our art journal so far. And this is what we've been working on for the last 5 weeks. We still have an empty page. So let's work on that page now. I'm going to be looking at water control, which can be an issue with watercolor paint, that sometimes you feel as though your paint might be too runny or too thick. I'm going to give you a value study here. And I'm starting by drawing some little sketches. This first one is a little teacup. I'm going to put a little tea bag coming out of the end, just making a little fun picture. Then I'm going to draw a coffee cup. This will be like a coffee mug without the saucer. Just simple lines. Next, I'm drawing some whole milk. just a little milk bottle at the side. And this is just a fun exercise to demonstrate water control and value studies. Put some milk in your bottle. Now I'm making a cream jug. Just quick little doodles here. And finally, I'm drawing some butter. So I'm making sort of like a long box shape and putting a saucer on it like I did with a teacup. And there's our butter. And I'm going to use the colour blue. I'm going to choose a nice deep colour blue. I find blue works really well for value studies. So what we're going to do now, we're going to look at water control. And I'm going to start with the lightest colour first. I'm putting it on my china plate and then I'm tipping the plate. What I'm looking for is a very runny mixture similar to the consistency of tea. You can see that's quite runny. You just keep adding water to your brush until you get this really runny tea-like consistency. And this is on dry paper. Now I'm taking a clean brush, a different brush, and just making a small circle of water on my page. And I'm going to use the same paint consistency, wet in wet. I'm not going to paint it on, I'm just dabbing it on because I don't want to add extra water to it because we're already painting it into a round wet shape. Now I'm taking a little bit more pigment, mixing it up, and then adding my water. This time I still want a runny mixture, but I want it so that the paint runs a little more slowly on the plate. And that's about right. So this is a slightly darker colour or stronger colour, stronger version of the blue. I'm just tapping that in. Again, taking a clean round brush, creating a circle of water and just tapping it with the very edge of my brush because I don't want to water this down any further. And watching to see how it diffuses in wet. Now I'm taking more pigment, this time mixing in with what I have, and I want the consistency of whole milk. So it's still going to be runny, but when I tip the plate, the drips are slower drips. So this gives me a deeper colour again, or a deeper value. So this study is called a value study. The value is how dark or light the colour is. And you can see I'm using exactly the same colour blue each time, just changing the amount of water that I'm using and using it on either a dry surface or a wet surface and achieving a different result each time. Add in some more pigment. This time we're looking for the consistency of cream. So I'm tipping my paint and it's running slowly. It's not dripping, but it is making a nice slow sort of movement down the plate. So I think that's a good consistency for cream. You can see here how it's making a real scribble look on the plate, and that's what you're looking for, that lovely scribble. So this is now the consistency of cream. And I'm adding that next to my little cream jug. And you can just tap it in to make it nice and smooth. And clean water again on the clean brush. And then using the edge of my flat brush to tap in the pigment to the wet water. And you can see how it's diffusing. It's a very soft diffusing on the tea example at the top of the page. Now we're down at cream. You can actually see how the paint spreads out within that circle. Now I'm using the paint at full strength. This is called full mastone. This is now the strongest value for this colour blue. And this is the butter consistency that we're after. So I'm not adding any water, I'm just taking it straight from the palette. You can see the way that diffuses so beautifully in that wet pool. So here's your value study completed from light to dark, on dry and on wet. I find these little drawings really helpful when I'm mixing my paint and helps me remember how value studies work. So now we're going to talk about upgrading your paints when you're ready to upgrade, and you may not be ready yet. The Micador paints are fine, but they are not light fast. If you're looking for some more professional grade paints, I found this mixing set, which is called the Essential Watercolor Mixing Set from Daniel Smith. If you'd like to try Daniel Smith paints, this is the best place to start. This was a little good value set. It came with a mixing chart. So I'll be doing a video in the next few weeks where I make some more colours from the three primaries, the warm primaries and the cool primaries that are in this set. So just like I mixed the warm and cool colour wheel from the Winsor & Newton paints, you can do that with these colours as well. It also comes with some watercolour ground, which is an added bonus. Now let's talk about upgrading your paper. We're starting at the most expensive paper and working our way down to the least expensive. Arches paper or Arches paper is my favourite paper to use. I love Arches cold press watercolour paper. It also comes in massive sheets, and you can cut down your sheet into about 6 A4 size pieces. It also comes in a lighter weight paper, but I do find with the lighter weight I need to tape my paper with my masking tape so that it doesn't buckle. It still gives a beautiful result though, and it's less expensive. Now another 100% cotton paper is the Fabriano Artistico paper, which is marked at 100% cotton. This is the hot pressed paper, so it's a nice smooth texture, and it comes in different weights. It comes in 300 GSM and it comes in the lighter weight paper as well. The lighter weight paper will be less expensive. It comes in smaller pads. And the other paper I really like and I'm using quite a lot is from Bauhong Academy. This paper comes in a block, and that means you don't need to tape it down. You just need to take it out of the pad when you're finished with a knife. The smooth texture of this is lovely for doing fine work. Most good watercolour papers are available in 3 textures: hot press, cold press and rough. These are available through Amazon, and I find them to be quite economical paper, even though they're still 100% cotton. And then you can just open the top with a knife here and peel your pages off when they're finished. Another little paper that I enjoy using is the Daler Rowney postcards, the watercolour postcards. And these are quite thick and they're lovely paper to work on. They have a nice texture and they are actual postcards. But remember, if you're sending these in the mail, I put mine into a clear plastic sleeve so that if they get water on them, they won't be destroyed. And the old favourite and the least expensive of all these papers is the Canson watercolour paper. It's not 100% cotton, but it still works really nicely. This one in particular has a very unusual texture and I like working on this paper. And again, there are various weights in the Canson watercolour paper. And this big pad is the one that I use mainly for my card making. It's quite sturdy paper and is very inexpensive. You can find this at most office work supplies. Well, that concludes Watercolor School. I hope you've enjoyed making your 16-page art journal and that you've painted along with me. I would love to see your work, so remember you can post on Instagram and tag me at Vicky Parfano Studio, and I'll be sure to come and comment or leave a comment under the video. Thank you so much for joining me. I've had a blast. I hope you've enjoyed it too. And I'll see you again next time for more watercolour videos. Bye for now.